Welcome to the Revere Veterans community. Today we really have a special guest coming all the way from Tewksbury, Massachusetts. His name is Father Healy. First, let me welcome you, Father Healy, and thank you for coming all the way and filling in.
Thank you. We're delighted to be here.
My pleasure. Father Healy was a chaplain at the Chelsea Soldiers Home for 10 years. And on February the 1st of this year, he began his semi-retirement. But he also goes back to the Chelsea Home twice a week.
Yes.
Very good, Father Healy. And by the way, Father Healy is 91 years old. He spent 23 years in the Army, 2 tours in Vietnam, and also as a missionary in Japan. Now, Father Healy, you have a lot of good stories to tell about your time in Vietnam, your time in Japan, even near West Point. But you told us a story that I would like you to tell the people about the time that you were flying from, I believe it was the airport, to Danbury, Connecticut?
Right. No, actually over Danbury.
Over Danbury.
So,
before you start, if you believe in miracles, folks, you're going to hear one.
actually, I came back from Japan after 7 years over there as rector of our Oblate Seminary. And I'm from Charlestown, born and brought up in Charlestown. And I was flying in December from our local Logan Airport to Newark. I was going to preach at over in one of the towns there in New Jersey. So as we were flying this Saturday afternoon about 4:30, we were just over Danbury, Connecticut at 12,000 feet. And our plane, which was a Constellation Eastern Shuttle flight, collided with a TWA 707 jet. The jet plane landed safely in Kennedy without anyone receiving a scratch, and our plane lost its tail. It was a Constellation. It has a triple tail, and our plane crashed into a farm in New Salem, New York, and several people died, including the pilot, who had been an Army Air Force pilot in the Berlin airlift. And anyway, it was a very traumatic experience. The plane burst into flames as we landed and crashed into the farm. Several people were trapped within the plane itself, and I was unconscious. When I came to, I was in the midst of flames. I crawled out, and as I crawled out on the land at the furrowed farm, I saw the nurse from the Chelsea Naval Hospital who had been sitting beside me. She was wounded with a broken leg, couldn't do much to help. And a lot of the local farmers came, and they did what they could to help us. So it was a traumatic experience. Many strange things happened at a time. For example, there was one woman who had high heels on, patent leather high heels and a fur coat. They found her walking away from the crash site.
Excuse me.
So they went over to get her, and they said, you know, where are you going? She said, I've been waiting 2 years to get a ticket for My Fair Lady, and I'm not going to miss it now. So she was going out looking for a taxi cab. So they brought her back, of course, and she went to the hospital with the rest of us. That was just one of the incidents. There was a little infant who was thrown about 20 feet from the crash site, landed in the furrowed field also, but again, had not a scratch on it. So it was just amazing how the Lord seems to pick and choose those who's going to call home in that particular moment. So to me, it was a semi-miracle, and I remember too that the person in the seat next to me, as they announced we were going to crash and we were going earthward from 12,000 feet, she said, Father, I had given a blessing. She said, is that enough, or could I go to confession? I said, no, you could go to confession. So she went right back to when she was baptized, and I was saying, I wish you would hurry up so I could say a few prayers myself before we crash. So anyway, I gave her absolution, and she survived with only a broken leg.
Father, I want to thank you for something, but I would like you to start from your early childhood when you first decided to become a priest. I mean, you just don't grow up being a priest or a rabbi or an imam. Start from the beginning when you first get the idea and say, that's what I want to do when I grow up.
Well, I mentioned that I was born and brought up in Charlestown, and we had kind of a bad reputation. People who didn't live in Charlestown said, geez, don't go to Charlestown. But actually, I hung around with a group of my peers, about 21 of us. We played baseball together, and before every ball game, we went to St. Mary's Church and said a prayer that not only that we would win, but that none of us would be injured. And from that particular group, St. Mary's Parish, 5 of those 21 young men became priests. 4 of us, 5 of us were together in Japan later on, and on Bunker Hill Day, the 17th of June, we would gather in downtown Tokyo at the Daiichi Hotel and have a dinner honoring our friends back in Charlestown for Bunker Hill Day, the parade and all. And that group was one Jesuit, Father John Hughes, an oblate, myself as an oblate, Father Nick Neville from Monument Square. Father Ed Williams was over there, he was from Charlestown. And with one other priest, a Sacred Heart Father, who lived in St. Francis de Sales Church. So there were a few good people that came out of Charlestown. I say that with tongue in cheek because most of the people who came out of Charlestown were very good.
Father, what I would like to say, because I mentioned that you were at the Soldiers' Home for 10 years.
Right.
We have a woman at the Senior Center. Her name is Lois Diamond, and she makes blankets. She has the women sewing blankets, and they are dropped off at the Soldiers' Home,
Right.
given to the soldiers. We do Christmas cards at the Soldiers' Home. What I would like to know, in all the 10 years that you were at the Soldiers' Home, could you give us some good stories, and maybe if there are any sad stories?
Yeah. Well, a very wonderful thing is the young lady who made the blankets over at your senior center. I saw those blankets come in, and I saw them given to the soldiers in the beds and in their wheelchairs. And the idea that they were so grateful that people did think about them. There are many fellows over there at the Soldiers' Home who actually have no families at all. Some of them are from out of state, some of them are from up around Maine, New Hampshire.
I know, I visited some of them.
But you yourself, Mo, were one of the ones who came over and did an awful lot. The Irish-American Club in, where is that, in Malden? They come every year and they give out 300 pairs of sweat socks. They go around to the wards and give them out to the men in the hospital wing. And the men enjoy it very much. They also give a donation to the Soldiers' Home so that they might have a bingo game once or twice a week. And many other celebrities do come in and they present entertainment for the soldiers. And the thing that amazed me about the Soldiers' Home in Chelsea is that it was founded about 1871 in order to take care of the veterans who were kind of homeless and abandoned in the streets of New England. So they started the Soldiers' Home in a very beautiful section of Chelsea known as Powder Horn Hill. It had been a resort area when they bought it in the 1800s. It was a big resort hotel down where all those oil tanks are now, the oil farms. That was all a beautiful white sandy beach extended out to Revere Beach, and Revere Beach at that time was a subsidiary of Chelsea. And the center of Chelsea was at right by the Immaculate Conception Church in Revere. And the very, as I say, very beautiful beach that was called Crescent Beach. That was before it became Revere Beach. So the home expanded. So we have several buildings up there. And we have 500 men that are living at the Soldiers' Home, and of that 500, about 140 are in our long-term care facility, which is called Quigley Hospital. I came there from the Soldiers' Home in Washington, where I was a chaplain for 4 years when I got off active duty. And even though the facility down in Washington, which was built in 1850, and the first military burial ground was at the Soldiers' Home in Washington, and right at the Soldiers' Home. But the great thing is that I found the Soldiers' Home in Chelsea had so much warmth and a familial sort of relationship between the staff and the residents and the patients that it's really a wonderful place to spend one's last days.
Father, I would like to ask you something. You said you were in Vietnam.
I was.
We have the Vietnam Wall coming here. It's called the Wall That Heals.
Yeah.
It has all the 58,000+ people that got killed in Vietnam. It's going to be here on Thursday, June 13th, Friday, June 14th, Saturday, June 15th, and Sunday, June 16th. We would love to have you come down and bless the wall if you ever have the time to do it.
Yeah.
And we would like you to tell about your experience in Vietnam.
Right. So if I'm available, I certainly will make it a point to be here. And I have 14 of my troops whose names appear on that wall. I've been down to the one in Washington right after it was put up there. And as I say, I have 14 of my men whom I blessed and anointed. In fact, I used to anoint the Catholics, the Jews, and the Protestants, anyone who died there. We never knew. Couldn't get a good look at the dog tag, which would tell what their religion would be. And so someone was wounded in a chopper accident, we'd anoint them and then check later on to see whether they were Catholic or not. So 14 of them, and they're not all Catholic, are on that wall. And I've visited the graves there many times.
Another thing I would like to ask you, Father, this is something you and I have in common.
Right.
I was stationed in Germany.
Right.
You were stationed in Germany near Munich. I was stationed in Frankfurt and Berlin. And we used to fly in from Frankfurt during the Berlin airlift to Tempelhof. There was a city, a little town called Helmstadt, which was the stop where you went the Autobahn and the Russians would stop you and let you in. Well, they closed that off, so we had to fly in. I would like you to talk about your experience in Germany.
Right. Well, I first went there from Vietnam. I asked for an inter-theater transfer. So after 2 tours in Vietnam, I asked to go to Germany. And I was stationed at Gelnhausen. And you probably remember the very first thing that they teach you when you get there is the Germans will treat you nicely if you treat them nicely.
Correct.
So the first thing we had to learn was the expression, "Wo ist die Bahnhof?"
Where was the train station?
Right. So if you were lost any place in Germany, as a young American soldier, you'd say, "Wo ist die Bahnhof, bitte?" And they would tell you how to get to the train station. Right. So we would get on that. And I found the German people very, very friendly and cordial. And down in Bavaria, where I spent a good part of my time, the Bavarian people often say, "Ich bin Bayerische."
Yeah, I've been at Bayern.
I'm a
Bavarian, right.
Rather than Germany. But it was a very wonderful experience. I was then up in Garmisch-Partenkirchen.
Right.
And I was also at Oberammergau.
Oh, yeah.
I said Mass there, and that's where they had the Passion play every 10 years.
That's outside of Wiesbaden, by the way.
Very close, right.
Right.
And those were really wonderful days, and we would go up to Grafenwehr for our maneuvers. And I remember we went to a Lutheran church, called it Evangelisch in German.
Right, eventually.
And we were looking to get some type of bell to put up in the steeple of our chapel at Gelnhausen, because all we had was a siren which would sound every noontime, let everyone know it was noontime and make sure the siren was working. So a couple of my troops came in and said, "Father, outside that Lutheran church, there are 2 iron bells, huge bells, about 4 or 5 foot high." So we went to see the Lutheran minister, and we said, we noticed the bells outside. We're looking for some for our chapel at Gelnhausen, and would you be selling them? He said, "Father, if you take them, we'll pay you." And I said, "Well, we'd want to be paid, but we'd love to get them." So he said, actually, the story in those bells are that they are pre-World War I. 1915 or so.
Right.
And he said they're iron. So we've put in a new bronze set of bells which sound a little more beautiful. And the people whose families bought those iron bells very angry with me because I have them lying out there in the lawn, and if we get rid of them, they won't see them, and they won't be angry with me for getting rid of their parents' bells. So you can have them. So we made a donation to the church. We sent a tank retriever up, brought the 2 bells down, and we couldn't, they were too heavy for the chapel. So we put an A-frame up and we hung them outside, and we rang them every day for services.
I'd like to tell you a little story about Bavaria. There was a little town called Bad Reichenhall, and buried there was Baron von Richthofen, who was known as the Red Baron
Right,
during World War I.
right.
And I think he shot down like 72 Allied planes in there, which was right outside of Munich. I also worked in Salzburg, Austria on the DP camps. What year were you in Germany, if I may ask, Father?
I was in Germany from 70 to 75. I'm
Okay.
sorry, 71 to 75.
Yeah, I was there from 46 to 48, and
Yeah.
then from 48 to 52. And my commanding officer at that time was General Lucius D. Clay. So you must have been there when Konrad Adenauer was there?
Yeah,
Yeah, we called them the Alte, which
Yeah.
meant the old one.
yeah.
So, by the way, I would like to ask you, I know you're retired now, so what do you do now that you're not doing this anymore?
Yeah, actually, I have trouble with my vision, so I have to have a device that will enlarge any print. So I type what I have to do on a word processor, and then I put it on, print it out, and then put it on the screen. Screen has a font of about 1 inch or more, and I can read what's there, make any corrections. So I do a lot of writing. Writing is my hobby, and I had many articles published about different things that happened. For example, in Vietnam, I wrote a story about Christmas, combat at Christmas. And what it was, we had the orphans who came to our military compound. We had turkey for them and ice cream and mashed potatoes and candy bars. And the thing I liked the most was the ice cream. So we had written home to many and had the troops write home to their folks in the States that would like to have them send some type of Christmas gift. Clothing would be fine for children from age 5 to about 10 or 11. So they brought the orphans over. We gave them gifts. I remember one little boy, he had a pair of loafers on, those penny loafers, and they were much too big for him, but he wouldn't take them off. And they said, well, we'll give you a smaller pair. We'll give you sneakers that will fit. He said, no, I want these. So he said it in Vietnamese. So he continued to actually keep those loafers on all day long. They ate loads and loads of ice cream, and he probably went home with a stomach ache, but they had a better vision and version and attitude of the American soldiers. We heard many, many stories that were told about how cruel and rough and mean the American soldiers were in Vietnam. That's all a lie. There might have been 1 or 2 isolated cases, some GI that was probably mentally deficient.
The only one I can remember is Lieutenant Calley. That's the only one that came out in the papers at the time.
Yeah, well, of course, another representative came back and appeared before Congress and actually said that I was over there when he came out with a statement that the American soldiers in Vietnam were baby killers and marauders of women and terrible things. I never saw that. I actually, in my 2 tours in Vietnam, spent at least once a week going to the leprosarium and bringing food there. If you having been in the Army, you know that if the mess sergeant carries number 10 cans on his shelf that are outdated, he'll lose a stripe. So he would call me up, the mess sergeant, say, Father, we're having an inspection. I have to get rid of some of these number 10 cans. So we would take the food in those number 10 cans to the leprosarium, and the nuns loved it. There were French nuns there. And while I was there, the French ambassador came up from Saigon and presented the head nun there with the Légion d'honneur, which is the equivalent to the Congressional Medal of Honor. And she had been at the leprosarium for 50 years. So it was a wonderful time.
Father, I would like you to say, since you have a lot to do with soldiers and veterans, could you tell the people what they would like to do? Now, we ask for donations, not money sometimes, but things that soldiers need.
Yeah.
Could you tell us what would be good to give to the soldiers?
Yeah. Well, actually, the ambulatory soldiers know pretty much what they want to get themselves. Some of the guys up at the soldiers' home actually have jobs, and they go outside and work as security guards in many businesses. Some are crossing guards for the children at the schools in Chelsea,
Like
and they get paid for
yeah.
that.
I mean, what do they need, like toothpaste,
Yeah.
toiletries?
Well, they can use any of that stuff, but they don't really need that so much. One of the things they enjoy very much is to have bingos and to have the prizes for the bingos. They have money prizes, but at Christmas time they get a surfeit of gifts, a surfeit of sweaters and scarves, and they hardly care for neckties now, but handkerchiefs. And as I say, the sweat socks are well received at Christmas, and they come from the Irish American Club in Malden. 300 pairs they give out, and so they just like to have visitors come by, entertainment, any of the groups, whether it's if they have a little glee club or something. We have a group, a quartet that have been coming there for 18 years, and they dress up and they come every Tuesday very faithfully, and one of their members died about a year ago, and he was the superintendent of schools in Linfield. He played the piano. So they have a fellow plays the violin, another plays the guitar, another plays any other instrument at all. But when the one from the fellow that was the superintendent of schools in Linfield died, he was buried in Lowell, and I was up at the cemetery, and the three remaining members of the quartet, they came to the cemetery on Moore Street in Lowell, and they asked if if they could play the violin and do a couple of songs at the grave. It was one of the most upbeat burials that I've ever attended. He himself, the superintendent of schools, had been a member of the Battle of the Bulge, so he survived.
Right, Father. Before we close out, the Revere Veterans Service told me to ask that for donations, like what they need over there. They said they need white socks, they need Ziploc bags of any size, they need Crystal Light, and toiletries. That's what they need.
Yeah.
And they can be dropped off at 249R Revere Broadway at the Revere Veterans Service.
Yeah.
The senior center, they make hats for the soldiers to put underneath their helmets to absorb the shock.
Sure.
Lois Diamond says she needs some yarn.
Yeah.
Dark colored yarn, black, red, green, whatever dark colors they have, to be donated to 25 Winthrop Avenue, Revere, Mass, to the Revere Senior Center. Also, I would like to mention a lady that goes around with the World War II Women's Memorial. Her name is Eileen Murillo, and before we leave here, you can bless her over the TV and tell her thanks for what she's doing for the people of Revere. And before we wrap up, Father, I'd like to ask you one more question, if I may. The new chaplain that's coming, could you just tell us a little bit about him?
Sure. His name is Father Mike O'Hara. He was born in Bangor, Maine, and when he was about 2 or 3 or 4 years old, his father moved the family to Point Shirley in Winthrop, while the father went to Boston College Law School. When he completed his work at law school, he went to the family's residence up in Syracuse, New York. So Father O'Hara, after he was ordained an Oblate of Mary Immaculate, went into the prison ministry. So he spent 25 years in the prisons of New York, state and federal prisons. And when he reached the age of 57, the law in New York and federal prisons as well is that a chaplain is pretty well burned out by the age 57, so they have mandatory retirement. So Father O'Hara felt he had a lot of pep still left in him, so I called him and said, you know, would you like to come and take over the soldiers' home? And it's pretty much like the work you were doing. So he's delighted to be with the veterans, and he's there now, and I go down and help him out. So he'll become the boss, and I'm kind of his assistant 2 days a week.
Before we close, I would like to say, Father, you know, I always close the show with saying, God bless you. Well, I am going to close the show by saying, may God bless you. May God bless the people of Revere. May God bless our veterans. May God bless the United States of America. And on April the 13th, we're going to have at the Rumney Marsh Burial Grounds. They're going to have a services there. So you people out there, write down the date, April the 12th, and we'll see,
Right.
13th. We'll see you at the Rumney Marsh Burial Ground.
Right. So Eileen Murillo is with us, and actually we want to thank her for all of her efforts, the time that she spends in trying to encourage people to respect and honor the names that appear on the Vietnam Wall. They say 14 of those names were people that I worked with over in Vietnam, and the sacrifices that they made are too soon forgotten. So Eileen, thank you so much for the work that you do, and for just making a few more people, especially the younger generation, aware of the wonderful sacrifice that was made by so many of the young men who went to Vietnam and never came back.
The Father, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart and from the people of Revere for spending the time with us, and God bless you again.
Right. Now say to you, Shalom Aleichem.
Aleichem Shalom.
Right. Very
Okay.
good.
Thank you.